My name is Vivian Calloway. I'm 34, and for the last 6 years, I've been general counsel of a diagnostics company that just went public on the NASDAQ, which means I have spent my career reading exactly the kind of document most people never look at twice: cap tables, stock pledges, personal guarantees, the fine print that decides who actually owns what. So when my father called me 8 years after telling me not to come back and asked me to a small family lunch, just the four of us, I already knew two things before I hung up the phone. I knew exactly what page I was about to turn to in a file I keep in my own desk drawer. And I had no idea yet what my father was about to try to convince a room full of people was legally his. Welcome back to her final chapter, where every story starts with silence and ends with power. If you've ever been told the person you loved wasn't good enough for your family, this one's for you. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. I grew up in Wintervale, Connecticut, a town where the country club membership list mattered more than the school district, in a stone colonial my great-grandfather bought with textile money that had mostly evaporated by the time it reached my father. My father, Whitman Calloway, ran a small boutique investment advisory firm that he described at every dinner party as old line and discreet, words that mean exactly what you think they mean. My mother, Margaret, organized the Wintervale Garden Club with the same precision she brought to seating charts, and my older sister Bianca married a Yale-educated hedge fund associate named Preston in a wedding that made the Sunday Styles section. I was the one who went to law school instead of finishing arrangements committee. I clerked for a federal judge, spent 4 years at a corporate firm in Boston doing contract and securities work, and then, at 26, took a terrifying pay cut to become the third employee and first lawyer at a diagnostics startup two of my college friends had started in a converted machine shop outside Providence. I built our cap table from a whiteboard. I've personally reviewed, by my own count, over 1,100 contracts in the years since. I know a valid signature block the way a jeweler knows a real stone from 3 feet away. My quirk, if you want to call it that, is that I still keep a physical accordion file in my bottom desk drawer, not digital paper, labeled only personal, where I file anything I think I might need someday and hope I never do. Divorce decrees from friends who asked me to look them over as a favor. A copy of my grandmother's handwritten will. And since a Tuesday in October 8 years ago, a single sheet of cream stationery I have read so many times I can recite it without looking. My father's voice, when he called on a Thursday afternoon in March, sounded exactly the same as it had 8 years earlier. Measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who has never once had to raise it to get what he wants. Vivian, your mother and I saw the news. NASDAQ, was it? We'd love to have you, and... A pause, the smallest hesitation, the first crack I'd heard in that voice in a decade, and Dante for lunch, just the four of us. It's been too long, just the four of us. I wrote that down on the legal pad I keep beside my desk phone, the way I write down every material term in every negotiation I've ever conducted, because some habits don't check whether the call is business or personal before they kick in. I asked him what had changed. He said the words I'd wondered for 8 years whether he'd ever say to me. He's not our kind, Vivian. I know that's what I said. I've had a long time to think about whether I meant it. I hung up the phone and sat very still at my desk for almost a full minute. 8 years since that sentence had ended my relationship with my family. 8 years since I'd married the only man who'd ever made me feel like exactly enough, exactly as I was, with no ledger attached. And now, 2 weeks after Meridian Diagnostics rang the opening bell, my father wanted to know if I'd forgive him over lunch. I said yes. I want to be honest that I didn't fully believe him. I just wanted, badly, for it to be true. To understand what happened at that lunch, you have to go back to a Christmas Eve 8 years ago, in the same stone colonial, when I brought Dante Reyes home to meet my family for the first time. Dante grew up 40 minutes from Wintervale in a town my family had never had a reason to drive through, raised by a single mother who worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse. He left community college at 19 to apprentice as a machinist, taught himself CAD design at night, and by the time I met him at 25, he was building precision components for medical devices out of a rented bay in an industrial park, wearing steel-toed boots to work every single day of his life. He was, and is, the most quietly competent person I have ever known. He solved problems the way other people breathed, without announcing it, without needing credit. My father shook his hand for exactly 2 seconds at that Christmas dinner and did not speak to him again for the rest of the evening. My mother asked him, in front of the whole table, what his family did. When he said his mother worked in logistics, I watched her rearrange her face into something polite and utterly unconvinced. My sister Bianca, 3 glasses of wine in, asked him whether he'd ever considered finishing his degree, as though a trade were a phase he'd simply forgotten to grow out of. 2 weeks later, my father asked me to come to his office. He had a document waiting on his desk, a post-nuptial agreement his estate attorney had drafted, one that would have redirected my entire portion of my grandmother's trust, roughly $2.1 million, into a structure controlled entirely by him, accessible to me only if I ended things with Dante within the year. "This isn't about the money," he told me, sliding it across the desk. "It's about making sure you understand what you'd be giving up." I didn't sign it. I told him I loved Dante, that I intended to marry him, and that I wasn't interested in a financial leash disguised as a safety net. My father stood up, walked to the window, and said the 5 words that would define the next 8 years of my life without him. "He's not our kind, Vivian." Then quieter, the part that actually broke something. "You marry him. You're not one of us either." I married Dante 11 months later at a small vineyard in the Berkshires, 40 guests, most of them his family and our mutual friends. My parents did not attend. My grandmother, Eleanor, the one person in my family who'd never once asked what Dante did, sent a card with a check inside that I never cashed, and a note that read, "Marry the man who sees you, not the name that sees your money." She died the following spring. My father did not invite me to help plan the funeral. I found out the date from an obituary in the Hartford Courant. Here's the part I don't say out loud very often. It was never really about proving my father wrong. Some nights, driving home from depositions, I'd catch myself missing the version of my family that existed only in old photographs. My mother laughing for real, not for an audience. My father teaching me to sail on Long Island Sound before he ever cared what anyone else thought of the boat. I told myself I'd stopped needing that family a long time ago. I hadn't. I just stopped expecting it. My business partner and closest friend, Naomi, has known me since our first year at the machine shop, and she did not mince words when I told her about the lunch invitation. "Vivi, he didn't call because he's sorry. He called because you're on the front page of the business section. You know that." I told her I knew. She kept going anyway because that's what 15 years of friendship earns you. Your dad doesn't apologize. He recalculates. There's a difference, and I think you know exactly which one this is. Dante, when I told him, was quieter about it, in the way he's always quiet about things that actually matter to him. He set down the wrench he was cleaning at the kitchen counter and said, "I'll go if you want me there. But Vivi, I've built a life where I don't need his approval anymore. Don't go looking for something in that house that isn't there." I told them both I understood the risk, and I proceeded anyway, because underneath 13 years of legal training and a healthy professional distrust of unverified claims, there was still a 26-year-old girl who wanted, more than anything, for her father to have actually meant what he said on the phone. Hope is not naivety, it's just the most stubborn thing I have. The invitation said lunch. I expected a dining room, a tablecloth, maybe an apology delivered too formally to feel real. What I found, when Dante and I pulled into the gravel lot of the Wintervale Country Club, was a valet stand, 16 cars, and a private dining room with a hand-lettered sign propped outside the door that read, in my mother's calligraphy, "Welcome home, Vivian and Dante." "Just the 4 of us," my father had said. Through the glass doors, I could count at least 14 people already seated, plus a woman in a blazer near the bar whom I did not recognize, holding a leather portfolio and speaking quietly into her phone. Dante's hand found mine before I'd even opened the car door. "You okay?" I told him I was fine. I was already counting. We walked into applause, actual applause, the kind reserved for a returning war hero, not for the daughter my family had spent 8 years pretending didn't exist. My mother embraced me first, holding on a half-second too long, the way you hold on when you're checking whether the moment is as real as you're hoping. My father stood at the head of the table in a navy blazer that fit him differently than I remembered. Looser through the shoulders, the kind of fit that happens when a man has lost weight he didn't plan to lose. I noticed the small things before I noticed the big ones. That's the habit 13 years of contract review builds into you. My mother's Cartier watch, the one she'd worn my entire childhood, was gone, replaced by something plainer. Her handbag, a Chanel I remembered from a decade ago, had a corner worn pale and a strap reinforced with a discreet stitch of thread that didn't match. My father's car in the lot, I'd clocked it walking in, was a leased sedan 2 years newer than his usual model, but a full class smaller, the kind of downgrade a person makes quietly and hopes nobody notices. They were performing solvency in a room that cost $400 an hour to rent, and something underneath the performance was already cracking at the seams. Stay with me, because I want you to understand exactly how this lunch built, brick by brick, before it broke open, and what I found in the 20 minutes I stepped away from that table. My Aunt Constance, seated to my left, patted my hand and said, in the warm voice she reserves for backhanded compliments, "Well, aren't you the story of the season? Married the mechanic, and it turns out he was gold after all." Dante's jaw didn't move, but I felt his hand tighten slightly around mine under the table. Bianca, across from me, 3 sips into a glass of Sancerre, added her own brick a few minutes later. "Must be nice, marrying down and still landing on your feet. Preston and I had to work for everything we have." Preston, beside her, studied his bread plate with great interest. A family friend I vaguely recognized as my father's old golf partner leaned in and asked, not unkindly but not gently either, "So what's the company worth now?" Word around the club is it's substantial. I gave him a number that was technically public information and watched it travel down the table like a current through water. Every comment pointed the same direction. Vivian has money now. Vivian's husband turned out useful after all. Nobody, in nearly 40 minutes, had asked me a single question about my actual life. Not about our first years in that machine shop, not about the 1,100-hour weeks, not about the 2 times we'd nearly run out of runway before the Series B closed. Just the number. Always, eventually, the number. I excused myself before the entrees arrived, telling my mother I needed the ladies' room, and instead walked toward the club's small business center off the main hallway. A habit, checking my phone for a filing deadline I genuinely did have that afternoon. The door was ajar. On the desk inside sat a manila folder, unattended. The woman in the blazer nowhere in sight, her leather portfolio open beside it. I want to be clear I wasn't hunting for anything. But the folder's tab, in my father's handwriting, read, "Meridian, Callaway interest, and 13 years of instinct will not let a general counsel walk past those words on a desk unattended." Inside was a document I recognized instantly, in structure if not in content. A personal guarantee, dated 9 years earlier, purporting to show that my father had personally loaned Dante $5,000 during the machine shop's earliest, leanest months, convertible, under the terms typed on the page, into founder-level equity at Meridian Diagnostics should the company ever go public. Attached to it, a cover memo from the woman in the blazer, a wealth strategist named Renata Cole, outlining a proposed claim against roughly 2.3% of the company's newly public shares. At current valuation, just under $9 million. I had built that cap table myself, line by line, from a whiteboard in a converted machine shop. I knew every dollar that had ever come into that company and exactly whose name was on it. My father's name was not one of them. I had never even met him before Dante and I were engaged. He could not have loaned Dante $5,000 9 years ago, in a room, on a date, that I could already tell, from the stationery alone, a letterhead style my father's firm hadn't used since a rebrand 6 years earlier, did not exist the way the document claimed. I set the folder back down exactly as I'd found it, closed the door quietly, and walked back to the table with the same expression I wear reviewing a hostile term sheet. Pleasant. Unreadable. Fully operational. I sat back down beside Dante, who glanced at me once, quick and searching, and I gave him the smallest shake of my head that meant later. The table had moved on to dessert plates by then, and my father was tapping his water glass with a fork, the sound cutting through Aunt Constance's story about her renovation. "I want to say something," he began, and the room quieted the way rooms quiet for men like my father, out of habit more than respect. "Vivian, we've missed you terribly these 8 years. And Dante," he turned toward my husband for the first time all afternoon, and something in his face I almost mistook for warmth flickered and settled into something colder, more prepared. "Dante, I'll be honest. I said things I shouldn't have, back when this all started. I said you weren't our kind." The second delivery, aimed directly at Dante, in front of 14 witnesses, wrapped in an apology that hadn't finished its sentence yet. "But," my father continued, and there it was, the turn I'd been bracing for since the manila folder, "I did believe in you both, even then. Which is why, years ago, I made sure you had what you needed to get that company off the ground. I think it's time we talked about what that meant for the family. He gestured, and Renata Cole appeared at his shoulder with the leather portfolio, laying the same document I'd already read in front of Dante and me on the white tablecloth, between the dessert plates. A personal guarantee executed 9 years ago, she said, in the flat, practiced tone of someone who has delivered this exact pitch before. Convertible at IPO. We're prepared to be reasonable about timing, but the family's interest here is real and substantial. My father folded his hands on the table, the same gesture, I noticed, that Whitman Calloway had used before every important ask of my childhood. Sign it, Vivian. That money was always ours. Third delivery. Not the same words this time. A variation, sharper, the mask finally down enough to show what had been underneath the whole lunch. Not he's not our kind anymore, just the truth of what the reunion had actually been for. I let the silence sit. 1 second. 3. 5 full seconds in a private dining room where 16 people had gone, almost in unison, very still. Aunt Constance reached for her water glass and didn't drink from it. Bianca's fork hovered an inch above her plate. Dante's hand found mine again under the table, steady, not gripping, just there. That money was always ours, I repeated, quiet. Dad, I built that cap table myself. I know every dollar that's ever touched that company and exactly whose name is on it. Yours isn't one of them. Here is what happened next, in real time, in front of every person who'd spent the last 40 minutes reminding me what I was worth in dollars. Renata Cole's composure held for exactly as long as it took me to reach into my bag and pull out my phone. Miss Cole, may I see the notarization on that guarantee? I noticed the acknowledgement page is dated a Sunday. I turned the document toward her, toward the table, tapped the date typed beside the notary seal. November 9th, 9 years ago. That was a Sunday. Connecticut notaries don't commission Sunday acknowledgments through the state office that issued this seal. I checked the registry on my way to the restroom because I happened to recognize the stamp style as outdated the moment I saw it. She glanced at the date. Her jaw tightened, the same tell I'd watched cross my father's face 100 times growing up, passed down like a family heirloom nobody chooses. That could be a clerical error. It could, I agreed. So let's look at the signature instead. I turned to the second page, the personal guarantee line, my father's signature beneath it. I've reviewed exactly 4 documents bearing my father's real signature over the course of my legal career. His will, 2 loan guarantees for his own firm, and my parents' original trust documents, all of which I'd handled as outside counsel years before any of this began. I laid my phone on the table, a photo of one of those signatures pulled up from my own firm's archive, side by side with the one in front of us. This W isn't his. Look at the crossbar. My father drags his pen through the top stroke every single time. He's done it since I was a child. This one lifts and restarts. Somebody traced the shape, not the hand. The room did not breathe. My father tried a second time, reaching for the document like he could physically will the ink to change. Vivian, this is exactly the kind of thing that... He stopped himself. Exactly the kind of thing that what, Dad? Destroys a family? Or gets you caught? Renata Cole closed her portfolio without being asked. She did not look at my father again. Bianca set her fork down entirely. My mother's hand went to her mouth, and I watched, in her eyes, the arithmetic finally complete itself. Not shock that the document was fake, I realized. Shock that I'd found it before she'd had a chance to talk him out of bringing it at all. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, set it back down. I don't owe you $9 million, Dad. I never did. My father did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that, because some of you watching this will want him to, and I understand why. Forging a notarization and a signature to extract equity from a public company is technically a felony in the state of Connecticut, and I could have referred the document to the state's attorney the same week. I didn't. What I did instead, over the following month, was call an estate and fraud attorney I trust completely, lay out everything, and let him deliver a single message on my behalf. The claim was withdrawn in writing, permanently, with an acknowledgement of its fabrication, or the document went to the state. My father withdrew it within 11 days. Renata Cole, whose firm had apparently helped structure similar family interest claims for at least one other client before, according to public records I later found, quietly lost her license to practice as a registered investment advisor the following spring, after a second complaint surfaced from an unrelated family. The financial picture, once the performance stopped, was almost sadder than the fraud itself. My father's advisory firm had lost its two largest institutional clients 3 years earlier, in a market downturn nobody outside the family had ever heard about, because appearances were the one thing Whitman Calloway had never learned to let anyone see cracked. The club dues, I learned from my mother months later, had gone unpaid for 2 quarters before that lunch. The lake house in the Berkshires, the one from every childhood summer photograph, had been quietly listed and sold 18 months earlier. Nobody had told me. Nobody had told Bianca either, until it was already gone. The quieter thing happened almost by accident, the week after the lunch, while I was clearing out a box of my grandmother Eleanor's things my mother had finally shipped to me, 8 years after she died. Tucked inside a jewelry case with her pearl brooch was a letter I'd never seen, dated the week of my wedding, addressed to my father, never sent. In it, my grandmother had written that she was leaving her portion of the family trust structured the way she had, outside my father's control, directly to me, because she'd watched him spend a lifetime measuring people by their usefulness, and she did not want that lesson passed down to the one grandchild who'd married for love instead of leverage. Vivian sees what's real, she'd written. I hope someday you learn to as well. My mother called 2 weeks later, quieter than I'd heard her in years, and asked if she could take Dante and me to lunch, just the two of us hosting, at a diner, not the club. She didn't apologize for the document. She apologized instead for never once asking Dante what he'd built with his own 2 hands in 8 years before deciding what he was worth. It wasn't everything. It was the first honest thing she'd said to me since the wedding, and I let that be enough for now. What I learned, sitting at a table where my own father tried to forge his way into a company he had never once believed in, is that you can fake a signature. You can fake a notary seal, a loan document, an entire decade of pretending you meant well all along. You cannot fake the one thing that actually built the life somebody's trying to claim a piece of. Every hour, every risk, every year, nobody was watching. That part, nobody can forge, no matter whose name they write beneath it. That's my story. If it meant something to you, drop a comment and tell me. I read everyone, and if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe to her final chapter, because there's another one waiting for you next week.